Okay, you're all set.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us again at our task force. I really appreciate everyone joining in. As you, I'm sure, have heard, there have been some developments since our last meeting. A lot of developments, a lot of things have been happening. I invited Dr. Michael Bauer to join us today, originally maybe a week and a half ago, to just kind of be here to give us a little bit of a status on where we are with COVID right now, what current recommendations are out there, how he's feeling about schools reopening and things like that. I know the landscape is about to change a little bit in the next half hour, so I do want to let everyone know we are aware that Governor Pritzker will be making an announcement at 2:30. Lots of credible sources say he'll be speaking about a mask mandate. But I still think it's important for Dr. Bauer to kind of give us some thoughts for us to report back on the survey data that we did collect so that the task force can have an idea of where the community was at or is at and how we might proceed moving forward if there is an announcement today at 2:30. So Dr. Bauer, would you mind doing a little bit of an introduction for you and your experience, and then just kind of like I talked about, give us a little bit of your thoughts on schools reopening in the current climate with COVID. That would be great.
Sure. First off, thanks for having me, and I'm glad you said introduction for myself and not everybody else here. So I know I've spoken to many of you in the past before on some Zoom meetings and some other local things. First and foremost, a pediatrician in the area, and I've been in practice for 33 years at Lake Forest Pediatrics, and really have had the pleasure and privilege of taking care of so many local children, from infancy all the way on up through college years, et cetera. I've also been involved throughout my entire career with Lake Forest Hospital, now known as Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital, serving in a variety of capacities here, from chief of pediatrics to the president of the medical staff. And for the last 5 years, have also been serving as the medical director for the hospital. And I currently do that since last March, a year ago, when the pandemic hit, in a full-time capacity, in addition to still seeing my patients several afternoons a week. So I do think this has put me in a good position to help problem solve for our community locally on what's going on with COVID and what may be the best approach to hit our number one goal, which is number one, reducing COVID, but number two, getting our kids back in school. That we all know what happened last year with having to switch kind of on the fly last March and April when schools closed to doing remote learning, and our educators from administration to teachers on down really did a wonderful job adapting. Last fall, they had spent much of the summer learning how to really teach remotely. Now it's time to get kids back in school. We've had a little bit of experience with some hybrids, with getting them back for brief periods last spring. And I think we know we can do this safely, that while educating our kids in the most effective manner, and that is in person, plain and simple.
That's great.
What else?
So one of the things that we have talked about in our community, and which I think a lot of communities are talking about, is masking, and the fact that for some children and families, masking feels very safe and a great way to do school. Right now, being in person, given the current state of the pandemic, and for some of our families, it feels more like a barrier, and it feels like it almost could be dangerous for children to be wearing masks for that length of time. So I'm wondering if you could address your thoughts on that in terms of students being masked when they come back to school in person.
That sure. We've talked about this throughout the summer, even before the expected announcement that's going to happen kind of simultaneously with this Zoom. To me, there is no question that the safest way to accomplish the goal of getting the kids back in school is having everyone masked. I understand there's been a lot of confusion because the CDC has come out with some statements and then revisions. I think everybody needs to understand and can understand that they're adapting. This is not a static situation by any means. No different than when a child gets sick, where you may be treating one way the first or second day of the illness, and then something changes with that illness, you change your plan and you adapt. The same thing is going on now. I think if we had been meeting last summer at this time and asked everyone, boy, take out your crystal ball, look a year ahead. Do you think we're going to be in a position of having more COVID cases on a weekly basis now that we've had vaccines for almost 8 months versus the current time? I think everybody would have said, you're crazy. We will be well on our way out of the pandemic. There's no way we'll be seeing increases. Unfortunately, despite even having these wonderful vaccines that started in late December, we are in that current situation. The numbers are increasing, and that's because this virus is pretty darn smart, and it has mutated and changed itself and really has become a different animal right now. It is a much, much more contagious version than originally came out of Wuhan, China, that it easily infects people. I think most of you have now heard it's considered as contagious as chickenpox. Back in the day, parents used to have chickenpox parties for their kids. Somebody had chickenpox, it was, let's go take our kids over there, because we know, put them in a room for an hour or two with them, they're going to get chickenpox and get it over with, right? That, well, Delta has now been compared to being as or more contagious than chickenpox. And that's part of the reason that we're in the situation we're facing now. And make no mistake, what we're seeing now is still going to continue and increase for a while till we get it under control. And it's creating kind of the perfect storm with the timing of the onset of school. So what do we know about the virus and what works? And it's still going back to those basics, right? Masking, distancing, I like the term physical distancing rather than social, because we still want people being social, right? Good hygiene, and providing the best ventilation possible, because we know that your likelihood of getting infected outdoors is much less than when you're in an indoor situation. But increasing the ventilation indoors is a big, big plus. We know those things work. That's the science. There's very strong evidence. Okay, we know that. So while we're hitting this perfect storm time of getting our kids back in school, and with the particular schools we're talking about, unfortunately, kids aren't vaccinated, because we're looking at ages 11 and under, and the current vaccines are only for those 12 and older. Hopefully, as we get closer, probably to around Thanksgiving time, give or take a couple weeks either way, I think we will have sufficient data from the Pfizer vaccine to get the approval to start giving it to our younger children. That I'm frequently asked when and what ages. The biggest question will be, is it going to be down to age 5 or all the way down to age 2 on the next cut? And part of that is going to depend on the numbers of children that they've been able to collect the data on. We know the vaccines are the way of getting out of this pandemic for everyone. So I hope that all of our educators and teachers have chosen wisely to get vaccinated. And until our kids can all get vaccinated, the best way to get them safely in school is following the masking guidelines.
So
The CDC came out with their recommendation, a strong recommendation, following the American Academy of Pediatrics, to strongly encourage everyone in the buildings to mask while they're indoors. Okay. They stopped short of a mandate. And so that's kind of the bit of dilemma that I think our administrative staff and educators have been placed in. How do we get everybody safely back to school while kind of looking at everyone's wishes and desires? And I know you did some surveys, Lisa, right?
we did, and I'm going to show the data in a second, but if you wouldn't mind, while you're on the topic of vaccines, because I know that some folks are really frustrated thinking about masking again indoors, especially if you have made that choice to be vaccinated. I think it's frustrating, right? And I just wondering if you could talk to this idea of what is happening with the vaccines, and in the future when they become available for children, your thoughts on the safety and efficacy of those vaccines.
Okay. First off, I want everybody to remember, while we are seeing breakthrough cases now with Delta, and we will continue to do so, we have to remember what were the initial expectations and hopes for the vaccine. And that was to prevent people from dying, to prevent people from getting seriously ill. And fortunately, the vaccines are still doing a remarkably great job at doing just that. So while we are seeing some breakthrough cases predominantly with Delta, that it's still doing its biggest job of keeping those people largely out of the hospital, and certainly, except in the rarest of circumstances, from getting seriously ill and dying. I want to stress the fact that the vaccines have been far more effective than what we were hoping for a year ago at this time, and when they were first released. I think a lot of you know we get yearly flu vaccines. In a good year, the flu vaccine carries about a 65 to 70% efficacy. In a not quite as good year, it's about 30 to 40% or so. These vaccines against coronavirus are much more effective. Safety-wise, they are great. The potential side effects tend to get magnified, that forgetting that we've given hundreds of millions of doses, not only in the US, but worldwide, very, very safely. If you're going to define, and people have heard me say this before, safety as zero potential for a side effect or adverse event, no, nothing will get to that. But these are as close to that as possible. The studies they're doing with children, if you remember, initially the vaccine was older, right? 16 and older for Pfizer, 18 and older for Moderna. Then they did the studies to be able to drop it down to age 12. It's the same vaccine with same expected type of rare side effects. They're just working on adjusting the dose right now. And in all likelihood, it will be a less dose, still a 2-dose series, but less of the actual vaccine being given to our younger population. So far, the early data is showing no difference in any of the side effects outside of the low-grade fever, feeling tired, soreness, etc. There are the very occasional other rare side effects we've heard about that fortunately everybody seems to recover from. So the take-home message here is, once the vaccine becomes available for our younger population, we want to strongly encourage everyone to get it, because that is our way out of this pandemic. I think those that are vaccinated, you start hearing they're getting frustrated by the unvaccinated groups, thinking, boy, this is what is prolonging it and keeping us from getting back to quote unquote normal. Let's not look at that. Let's just focus on getting everybody safely protected, right? There is going to be a question, will the vaccine ultimately be a mandated or required for school rather than highly recommended? We will leave that up to the state and government officials to determine. I remember hearing the same arguments back when chickenpox was a recommended vaccine, not required for school. The same arguments came up when it became required, with some people kind of yelling, screaming, stamping their feet that you can't make us do this to our children. And guess what? The rates of kids dying from chickenpox plummeted. And fortunately now it's a disease that is largely gone by the wayside, and nobody really thinks twice about it because it is a mandated vaccine for our children. If there had been the same kind of resistance in the past when we had smallpox, whooping cough, diphtheria. How many of you even know what diphtheria is, right? Used to kill lots and lots of people. If there had been that same kind of resistance to vaccines back then, we'd still be dealing with those diseases. Polio, another example. Fortunately, we've been able to pretty much do away with those diseases by letting the science take over.
Thank you. I appreciate you addressing that. I think I just want to recognize that piece of it, because our goal also as a school district is to get back to normal as soon as possible. And we have heard that obviously vaccines have been kind of the answer, and we do want to encourage folks to do that and for them to take advantage of that opportunity. But also appreciate the reassurance that that is a safe thing to do for your children and for yourself. We did issue, as you know, we've spent some time this summer working on some alternative scenarios potentially. And
that worked.
It did work. Been a lot of Zoom meetings over here too, Dr. Bauer. So we did issue a survey. We do, obviously, I just want to reassure the task force here that even as we were surveying and trying out some different thoughts, I've been so appreciative and grateful for Dr. Bauer's counsel as we've talked through some of these different scenarios and the safety, relative safety or concerns that he might have had. But essentially, the plan that we've been thinking about was whether or not we could offer some options to parents in terms of masking, because I have heard, aside from the survey, a lot of feedback from our parents on both sides of the issue. Many of our parents are very concerned about sending their children back if everyone is not masked. And we also have parents who are concerned about having to continue to have their child masked. And so the survey was helpful to us as an administrative team, and also helped us to determine whether or not it was viable for us to offer some options. But I did think it would be helpful for the task force to see where we are with the survey now and kind of where the community was feeling in late July. So essentially for our elementary school parents, we had about 586 responses. We had about 37% indicate wearing masks should be recommended, meaning not mandatory, but recommended. We had about 17% indicate that they should be mandatory regardless for everyone of vaccination status. And then about 47% indicating that they should be mandatory for unvaccinated students and staff. And so then that would be the majority of our students at the elementary school. since they are not 12 yet. So basically, the red and the yellow can kind of be combined here because our students at elementary are all under 12. And then when we looked at whether parents were interested in an option in terms of a classroom preference on masking, we had about 29 to 30% say, I would like my child in a classroom where masking is mandatory. We had about 30 to 31% saying, I'd like my child in a classroom where masking is optional. And then we had about 40% say they didn't really have a preference, but really just wanted the best fit classroom. And obviously that question came about because we knew if we were going to be accommodating mask preference, that the class list that our teachers worked on in the spring would need to be adjusted. And so I did have some parents reach out who indicated that on the survey that that was their preference, saying, you know, they really didn't love choosing between best fit classroom and mask preference, and that was an uncomfortable choice for them, which I can completely understand. And then moving to our staff responses to similar questions. So we had 44 elementary staff members respond, about 57% indicating that wearing masks should be recommended regardless of vaccination status, about 25% saying all people should be masked regardless of vaccination status, and about 18% supporting the idea of giving an option for mask preference in terms of classroom. So that's where we stand in terms of parents and staff input on the survey for elementary. In terms of our middle school, we asked some more general questions because we knew we would not be able to accommodate mask preference at the middle school given the schedule and that kids move around and mix. And so we had 31 to 32% indicating, the parents indicating that they would like it recommended and not mandatory for students regardless of vaccination status. About 11% that would like it mandatory for everyone regardless of vaccine. And then in the yellow again, that it should be optional for vaccinated but mandatory for unvaccinated. And in the middle school, then we're really just talking about our sixth graders who aren't 12 yet, aren't eligible for the vaccine, or the seventh and eighth graders who haven't been vaccinated yet. So that was the 231 parents that responded to that. And then looking at our staff responses, you can see a similar sort of breakdown here, about 20% that it should be recommended for everyone, about 20% that it should be mandatory for everyone, and about 60% indicating that it should be mandatory for unvaccinated only. And so these were the data that we were working on and have been working on for about a month to decide whether or not or what we could do to potentially accommodate some choice. And I do want to indicate that scenario for us was really in response to the fact that our local data in our zip code and in our county at the time when we began the survey was really low to moderate transmission. Since we sent the survey out, as you may or may not know, Lake County is now in substantial transmission. Our zip code numbers continue to be a little bit on the low end, but are definitely trending up. But we also have very good vaccination numbers. So our county and our area have done a really nice job of making sure that vaccine opportunities are available, and a lot of people have taken advantage of that. So as we've been looking at this option, I have been talking to Dr. Bauer about it to kind of talk through the potential benefits or concerns. I don't know if you want to address it at all, your thoughts about that plan, but that might be helpful for the group.
Sure. So first of all, point out, fortunately, as you said, Lisa, in your zip code areas, you are still in relatively low levels of transmission. That's fortunate. And I think everybody should try and celebrate that and say, let's keep it that way, right? Because we have a potential with sending our kids back to school. If we don't do it safely, there is a very substantial risk of igniting a big fire and changing those statistics. So we want to be able to keep it that way. So when Lisa and I looked at the different scenarios, again, my strong preference, which is what I think the governor is about to announce shortly, was that everybody should stay masked while they are indoors. That would be number one. Number two would be if those that are vaccinated, while we're having low local transmission rates, that vaccinated individuals may stay unmasked, but anybody that is unvaccinated, certainly all of the children 11 and under, need to stay masked. That would be option number two. Number three, in trying to balance everything and all of the pressures that the administrative staff is under from parents that are resistant to that a cohorting type option would be acceptable. That's different than saying it is the best option, but it would be an acceptable option that I think really poses minimal risk to those that choose to have their child masked. And that cohorting option would involve having classrooms where everybody is masked versus other classrooms if the parents have chosen to send their child unmasked, that they would be cohorted with unmasked children and no intermingling of the two. That in common areas such as hallways, etc., everyone would still have to mask. So I think that option would, if the option comes available and there is no mask mandate, that can still be done safely for those that are masking and vaccinated while minimizing any type of risk. But make no mistake, there still is a substantial risk in an unmasked environment that for spread of coronavirus. I also wanted, at least I do want to take this opportunity. I get faced with a lot of questions from parents and concerns about masks being unsafe, harmful for children. I've seen some come out and make it tantamount to child abuse. I have to tell you, in my experience, and I see lots and lots and lots of kids, it's a much bigger deal for the parent than it is for the vast majority of children. The kids do just fine in masks. I am not aware. I asked every one of my associates, other pediatricians and other practices of any harmful adverse events from wearing masks. I've looked at the literature, and the bottom line is there is none. There was a journal article in JAMA Pediatrics several weeks ago that actually got published from a study done in Germany that was not peer reviewed, that tried to relate increased carbon dioxide levels in children that were wearing masks all day. That article was retracted by the journal. It was not done properly. There is no validity to it, but sort of that harm is done when that gets sort of out there and propagated by social media, similar to a long time ago with the MMR and autism. And I think most people are familiar. There was a study published in a journal that again was retracted. Most of the authors said, boy, we falsified data. This was not done properly, but the so-called cat was let out of the bag. And that's still become urban legend. So I do want to state, I'm not aware of any studies showing adverse harmful events by children wearing masks all day, that it is safe, it's protective. As a matter of fact, I would encourage those parents that are concerned, double masking works even better, wearing a surgical type mask with a second cloth mask over it, if you're so inclined. Two of my grandchildren flew out to Los Angeles yesterday They stayed double masked. Unfortunately, their plane got diverted to Las Vegas for a technical problem. And what started as a journey at 9:30 in the morning didn't end until 11:30 last night. We're talking about a 3-year-old and a 4.5-year-old that stayed double masked that entire time outside of eating and drinking sips. And guess what? They were as happy as clams. So masks are safe. I really want to debunk any issues of it's harmful for our kids. I'm sure our staff will put it into place proper ways to take mask breaks. We all know there are individual children that can have some difficulties wearing them, especially for longer stretches. They will be accommodated in a safe manner for everyone.
Thank you for that. I know that one of our concerns initially in looking at a plan that would accommodate options was the idea that we were still under recommendations. So all of our health organizations that we've trusted this whole time until today really had recommended versus required. And so given that, plus our low numbers in transmission, that was part of the reason why we thought we might be able to accommodate some of these options, given that we anticipated that we might have some students come to school and not wear a mask, given that those were the circumstances. And so for our medically fragile students, the thought was to choose into a mask required classroom where that would be enforced. And even though we were still under a recommendation that would be a really safe option for a medically fragile student, as opposed to just sort of being in the general population and risking that someone may not choose to wear a mask. Do you have a thought on that, or?
Yeah, I think overall that can be done safely. There is an onus on everyone, though, to do proper screening. I have to do a check-in every single day still, and I'm fully vaccinated, looking at any symptoms, potential exposures, changes in habits. We really need everybody to step up. And I understand what a inconvenience it can be if your child has a sniffle, cough, cold, where you otherwise would say, this is just a cold, I'm still sending you to school. Right now, it's incumbent upon everyone to step up. You're going to have the proper screening measures in place regarding those things, but we can't afford having a child that is ill being sent to school. I know how inconvenient it is. I'm on the other end of having to do the testing for those children and writing the letters saying, okay, this is not COVID. As soon as whatever illness it is resolves, they can safely go back to school. But everybody needs to step up to keep all of our children safe.
Appreciate that. I want to open it up for the task force. If anyone has questions, would you mind if anyone had a question?
Not at all. There's got to be some.
And I've learned that wait time helps.
Yes. And then once they start, then they start coming. Otherwise, I'll call on somebody.
There's a question in the chat, I believe, or in the Q&A.
We did have a question, and it was sort of that one we just talked about, which was about medically fragile students, and the fact that obviously first and foremost would be everybody is masked, right? And there's just a requirement for that. But I think given if we were to go down that road of choice, that the mask required classroom would be a safe option for them.
Yes, I would certainly hope that in their home environment, with them being a medically vulnerable or fragile child, as you termed it, that everybody in the home environment was vaccinated and they were taking all the proper precautions to minimize any potential exposures. But again, go back to the basics. Why do we wear masks? Twofold. Number one, it really does a great job if somebody does happen to be circulating virus in their nose or mouth. It does a great job of preventing that spread of the virus out. Number two is it does provide protection for the individual that's wearing it and make it tougher for the virus to get in. So I think that in those circumstances, of course, you will continue doing the physical distancing of 3 feet, ventilation whenever possible, that can be done safely and really pose an exceedingly minimal risk to any surrounding students.
Thank you. We do have a question about masks on the bus. Masks on the bus were always going to be mandated. School buses are included in the public transportation designation, and we have been under orders on public transportation for quite some time that masks are required. And so on school buses, that was always part of the plan to have children have to wear masks in that situation. And then we have a question about compliance. And sort of, what will be our plan if we do encounter a student who is refusing or has difficulty wearing a mask. And I have to say this is a difficult question for us because our goal here is to make sure that all children have access to the learning environment as much as possible. That is our goal. And it is also our goal to remove as many barriers from engagement as we possibly can. And I would say, the first part of that answer is that we would work with children who do need mask breaks and look at our environment and see, where can we safely have a child take a break from a mask in a safe way so that that child can have a breather and it's not putting anyone else at risk. And then progressively working with parents and families to work together to figure out a plan if there's a different type of PPE and just have those conversations so that, again, we can remain compliant with the mandate that I think just came out, which is that masks will be required for pre-K through 12. So as an organization that we remain compliant and that our community is assured that we have, are compliant and are maintaining a safe environment that way, but also working with the families where this is really a difficulty for children and potentially has been. We also know that students are going to be returning to us, some of them after a very, very long time away from being in a school environment. I mean, for some of our children, for all of our children, it's been a long time since they've had a full day of instruction in our building with instruction live, expectations in terms of collaboration and participation. And my own children, I can tell you, their stamina is diminished. And I look around at our teachers on the screen and I know they know what it feels like to have everyone come back from a normal summer and, time away and relaxed schedules and maybe a little bit sleeping patterns that are different, eating patterns that are different. And it takes some time for kids to get reacclimated to the educational environment and how we need to work together to make sure that we're learning effectively together. And I know that our teachers will be expecting that this is probably going to be a longer learning curve, maybe for some of our kids, and a longer acclimation period. And so we are going to work with the kids and the parents to try to make sure that we can help our kids relearn the behaviors, gain some stamina, start to re-engage in that process with their friends and with their teachers and be social. I'm sure that there will be a question about whether or not we will need to comply with a mandate that was just issued from the governor. And I have to tell you that the answer to that is yes. As a public school, we need to comply with that mandate for a few reasons. One is that if we didn't, we as a district would be, we could be accused of willfully and wantonly sort of disregarding the health guidance from the state, our state board of education, government agencies that are charged with helping us make those decisions, because we are not medical professionals here. We are educators, and some of these pieces, we need to listen to the experts. So we will be complying with that mandate. There is a question about physical education and gym. Students will be participating in PE and health. We will get them outside as much as possible. And that is in a normal year anyway, but we will make sure that we utilize our outdoor spaces so that kids can be unmasked and be participating in physical education that way. When they have to be indoors, again, we'll be working with kids if they need a break, but really trying to get back to our regular physical education programming. We'll be back to using lockers. We'll be back to, changing for gyms so they can really get physical and get the exercise that we know they need. In terms of other aspects of the day that will be normal, again, we're returning to a full day of learning schedule at each of our buildings. The tech is going to be not utilized in school. We're not going to be utilizing Zoom in school and at home because everyone's going to be with us. So we'll be back to live instruction and teachers and students engaging together. We, again, will not be utilizing plexiglass shields. So I know some parents were concerned about that as an additional barrier to seeing the teacher, to seeing their friends. Those have been removed because we feel the masks will be able to take care of that piece. For us, we'll have a little bit more flexibility in terms of our room arrangements and things like that. Again, our self-certification processes, we were planning on changing anyway, that, we're just asking parents, we know the drill now, we know what to look for, the symptoms, the signs. We ask that you keep them home. And if you do bring them to school, you're sort of certifying that your children are well, and that they're ready to join us for school. We know that was a really big inconvenience for parents to have to fill out that form every day. So we will not be doing that. But I do want to reinforce that if a student does come to school and is exhibiting symptoms of COVID, our teachers are very aware of what those symptoms are, that we will still be calling our nurse down to do an evaluation. We will still have those students isolated while they're waiting to be picked up. But we are not going to be relocating the classroom and cleaning like we did last year. So the classroom will stay intact, but the child who is exhibiting symptoms will then be removed and isolated until they can be brought home. One other aspect that I want to talk through is that Lake Bluff will be implementing COVID screening, that parents can give us permission to, if they want to sign on to that program. And we will also have the ability to test in school students who are symptomatic. And so there's more information coming from the Illinois Department of Health about a test to stay program. So we're waiting on the details about that. But essentially what that means is, if a student were to be identified as a close contact and is asymptomatic, then we would have the ability to test the student with a rapid test on days 1, 3, 5, and 7, and they could remain in school even as long as they're asymptomatic. So that's the general idea from what we're learning from the Illinois Department of Health, which again, because I think all of our goals, all of us have a goal of uninterrupted learning this year and keeping kids in school with their teachers as much as possible, limiting the quarantines and things like that. And so we know how disruptive that was. The way we will be setting up our classrooms at 3 feet apart should really severely limit, the amount of quarantines, especially now that we will all be masked. But in the unfortunate event, if a student does have to be quarantined, we will continue to have support from a remote learning perspective. It won't look like it did last year. The students will be able to Zoom in and audit the core academic areas, and then work will be sent home. So it's going to look a little bit different. I think we've been able to delayer some of the mitigation strategies that we found weren't quite as effective, and just focus on the strategies that were really effective. And get back to just a more traditional and more normal school year and school day for our students. Are there any questions on that?
Can I ask a question about material use, like interactive play with the younger students, pre-KK? Will they be allowed to play with each other? Will they be able to use the same materials? Do we know what that's going to look like?
Dr. Bauer, do you want to talk us through that one? We just talked about it.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. Lisa told me they will be following pretty strict cleaning protocols at the end of the day. Those pre-K kids should remain masked. But in terms of an asymptomatic masked child that's touching things and then somebody else comes and plays with the same toy, etc., there's really a pretty minimal risk right now to that. So I think that is going to be allowed. People will be encouraged to utilize their own types of things, but intermingling like that should really not pose much of a threat. We've seen that in a lot of the other preschools, including over the summer, and there really is not increased transmission rates other than very isolated cases that's been associated with that. Lisa, I want to make the point so I don't forget, when you were talking about compliance with the mask mandate, it's really incumbent upon all of us, and I know hopefully some other people will be seeing these videos, really implore our students' parents, don't give the message to your child, you can go without a mask. I'm sending you without a mask. Nobody can make you do it. Don't put your child in that uncomfortable situation. The kids will comply. We need to educate the parents that despite their feelings, this is a rule. It's a law, and we don't go around instructing our kids to wantonly break rules and laws. So I really would implore those parents that don't agree with this decision about the mask mandate, think of your child first. Don't put them in that uncomfortable situation and really wrongful situation where it's potentially harmful not only to themselves, but to others to go about breaking the rules. And I think once we send that strong message to them, think about your child first, that we can hopefully not run into that situation and that will quiet down.
So I did have just one more question in the Q&A about quarantine, and I think it's worth kind of revisiting what it means to be a close contact, because at this point, there's been a little bit of a shift, but for the most part, the guidance that we've received from our health departments is that, we're basically talking about students that are within 3 feet of a confirmed positive COVID case for a sustained or cumulative 15 minutes. And so we're
within a 24-hour period.
Yes, thank you. And so we've lived this now a year, and I'm looking at our teachers on the screen. This is not easy to do, to monitor where kids are at all times. This is not the educational environment that we're used to operating in, right? We usually love to have kids mingling and collaborating and walking around and playing with each other. And we've had to be really strict around seating charts and making sure that we're watching and keeping kids distant. Just for this very reason. We're trying to avoid students coming into close contact with a potentially positive case. But again, the way that we're setting up our system this year again, and last year it was 6 feet. Now we're at 3 feet because I think the CDC and other agencies have adjusted given what they've seen happen in schools. So we're down to a 3 feet kind of radius around kids. And in classroom situations, there shouldn't be. If everyone is properly masked and everyone kind of hangs in their spots, we shouldn't have many close contacts, even if there is a student that comes with a positive diagnosis to school. And we're looking at our lunchrooms to make sure that they are distanced. And we've got, we have a good handle on the amount of time that they're together and eating. And again, the same with recess, although we haven't said masks, we still will not be requiring outside. And that is still okay for us to do. So when kids go outside, they'll be able to play and take their masks off. Our playgrounds will be open. They'll be able to play games where, we'll have our equipment out and things like that. But that being said, I do want everyone to understand our teachers and supervisors do continue to watch and monitor, just in the sense of if we have a couple of kids that definitely hang around each other a lot, even outside, and one happens to be symptomatic, the health department really asks some very, good questions to help us conduct our case investigations. And I see Kathy on there too. She's been a part of all of these conversations. And so we try to keep that information the best we can so that we can answer those questions and limit the close contacts and the kids that would need to quarantine so that we can keep everyone in school. But if we do have to issue a quarantine, then like I said, the student will be given access to the core academic areas to audit the class. We'll be sending some work home, and it will look different because not everyone will be on Zoom, but I think people will appreciate the fact that not everyone's on Zoom in school. It'll just be when you're quarantined, and hopefully we won't have too many of those.
And remember, a plus for a vaccinated person, if you are identified or contact traced as an exposure, if you're asymptomatic, you do not need to quarantine.
Right.
That wear a mask indoors. What did recently change is that it's now suggested that you get a test between day 3 and 5 as a vaccinated person that was exposed, that get tested between day 3 and 5. And if your test is negative and you remain asymptomatic, then as soon as you have the negative test, you're back to square one. So it's a big plus to not have to quarantine as an exposed vaccinated person.
Are there, I do want to address, one other piece, and I think we saw this in the feedback and we talked about this last time. Our teachers spend a tremendous amount of time and effort organizing our class list, especially at the elementary level, to make sure that we have great balanced classes and we're matching needs and we're talking through and articulating about what each of our children needs going into the upcoming school year and really trying to create the best learning environment. And I think that was something that I heard from teachers, one, that they were concerned about kind of reshuffling classes, and also heard it from parents, that was a concern as well, that they really trust our teachers and want their children in those environments that were really purposefully designed with kids' needs in mind. And so I think in one way, this mask requirement that just came out today, we are going to go ahead and obviously comply with that. And we'll be returning to our original class list, and those will come out soon. August 13th, we'll be sending information home, welcome letters and class lists and things. And I think we're going to have a really amazing school year. I think that our I know our teachers are excited to see their kids back. I know our administrators have been spent all summer. We've been spending planning and talking about how we can, support everyone and really create a welcoming and it's like a celebration to have everyone back. And I know there's a couple of things that we're still dealing with as we're coming into the end of this thing. But as Dr. Bauer, suggested, we are all in this together. And I truly am so proud of how our community handled last year and all the different ways that we tried to adjust and keep bringing kids back, because that's our ultimate goal. We want our kids in, we want them learning, we want them engaged with us. Our teachers worked really hard to keep making those adjustments, just like our admin team did. And we were looking into that ability, but honestly, I think what we're going to have this year moving into the fall is a really great situation for all of our kids, and it's going to be safe and it's going to be effective, and we can hopefully all really get back to concentrating on teaching and learning and connecting with each other and building community. It has been a tough 18 months. I completely understand. I think we're all feeling the weight and the fatigue of this situation and the fact that it is continuing, even though last year we were all hoping we would be in a different spot. But I do know that this community really values their schools, values their teacher, values the education that we provide as a district. And I think that we are going to be set up in a really great way to see our children back on August 25th and work through the final stages of this together as a community. So if there's, I want to open it up in case there are any other thoughts or questions.
Guys, I applaud you for doing what you do. Kids are resilient. They're going to be happy as kids can be coming off of summer break, getting back to school and seeing their friends and doing this. So thanks for everything that you guys are doing for our students in our community. And feel free to reach out to me either directly or through Lisa if you have any other questions regarding COVID that I can be helpful with.
I appreciate you so much joining us today. I appreciate every single person on this screen, not only for your contribution to this task force, but to our community of learners. Every single one of you is so important to what we do here. So thanks for joining us, and we will be in touch. We need to meet again. And if there's nothing else, I wish you all well. You'll be hearing from us soon with more information. And Dr. Bowers, just a few thank yous in here. Appreciate you coming in here and giving us your thoughts. And with
My
that,
pleasure. Best part of my day.
all right. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you soon. Take
All
care.
right. Bye-bye.